Good afternoon. I'm Christina Gabardi, Coordinator of Public Programs here at the Linda Hall Library. Thank you for joining us today for How Do I Become a Computer Scientist? This interactive program is specifically designed to give viewers the opportunity to ask questions to our professional. If you have a question today, type it in the Q&A chat box you see at the bottom of your screen. And if you're viewing on Facebook, type it in the comments section. We are pleased to be joined today by Alexa Summers. She is an assistant professor of web development at the Johnson County Community College and teaches computer science part-time at UMKC. And on the side, she also works as a freelance web developer. Alexa, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course, and now I will kick it over to you to get this all going, and I will be back for the Q&A.
Sounds good. Let's share my screen here. All right. So hi, everyone. Again, my name is Alexa Summers. I teach full-time at Johnson County Community College in web development and digital media. I just switched over this semester from video game development. And I also am an adjunct at University of Missouri, Kansas City in computer science. And on the side, I am a freelance web developer. Today, I wanted to talk to you all about how I got into computer science, how vast the world of STEM actually is, how computer science doesn't have to mean software engineering, how you can get creative with your options and end up in something that you really enjoy, as well as how to create your own opportunities. So for a little bit of background, computer science was not my first choice. I spent a lot of elementary school wanting to be a meteorologist. After that, it was polysomnography. And I'm pretty sure with that one, I just kind of latched onto a fancy word that I heard my mom say once. Like it sounded cool, but like I honestly can't tell you why. After that, I thought about things like forensic pathology, which is running autopsies for those who don't know. There were a lot of pros and cons to this career choice, right? Like the customers aren't going to talk back to me. They wouldn't change their order halfway through. They're not going to complain about the kind of music that I'm playing. I don't have to make small talk when my hands are in their mouth, you know, that kind of stuff, but still a little bit smelly. I thought about virology. Obviously, now that we're past the pandemic, I'm very glad I didn't pick that. When I was in high school, I joined the computer science club for something to do. And shortly after I joined that, I went with the club to a programming competition out at K-State. I could not do a single thing. I was simply there as decoration. And my teammates, minus me, they got second place. It was really cool. I still got a medal and I got to be in all their pictures, so that was fun. And I remember that our team name was the Fantastic Fu Manchus, which is this image here of us all wearing our little mustaches. Honestly, I have no clue what that was all about, but I really wanted to be a part of that the next time that a competition came around, so I decided to stick with it. I stayed in the computer science club for like 2 years until theater and woodshop kind of took over. During those 2 years, I did not learn a single thing. It was 100% a social hour for me. My friends were there. It was a great time, but I still didn't learn anything. And at some point, it was time for me to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And my parents were like, hey, you're really good at helping us on the computer. What about computers? And just like every kid, I'm like, I helped you post something to Facebook earlier. And yesterday I got down on the floor and I helped you plug in your computer and that was it. But instead of saying that to them, I was like, you know what, sounds good. I need to pick something. So that is what I did. I had been attending Johnson County Community College since my junior year of high school on a program that was previously known as the Senate Bill 155, now known as Excel and CTE, which enabled high school juniors and seniors to take certain classes for free. If anybody in the audience has a student of age or any kids or anything like that, or anybody who might be eligible for this, please go look into this. It's such an incredible opportunity for them. I've got a link right here on the slide. I took all sorts of really cool classes on this bill to kind of explore a little bit. I was still kind of on the criminal justice kick, so I took things like forensic science and criminology and law. But then I also took baking, which my family still talks all the time about how I accidentally used salt instead of sugar in my banana bread. So that part was criminal. Baking was definitely not for me. But anyway, when it came time for me to start deciding what I was going to do for college, I started at Johnson County for my prerequisites. And for the most part, my prerequisites went fine. But of course, I struggled a lot with the same classes that a lot of people struggle with. Calc 1, Calc 2, Engineering Physics 1, Engineering Physics 2. I barely scraped by in those classes, and I basically lived in the Math Resource Center. It even got to the point where, to be funny, my friends labeled the chair that I always sat in with my name and a skull and crossbones. It was very fitting, I think. But these classes made me reevaluate if computer science was going to be a good fit for me. I explored other computer-related options that maybe wouldn't have those classes, but for the most part, they were required for everything. And so it was like, well, okay, I guess I'll just suffer then. Me and everybody else, of course. And so halfway through my prereqs, I needed to decide on a 4-year institution to transfer to afterwards. It was down between KU and UMKC because I wanted to live at home to save some money. And to be completely honest, the only reason why I chose UMKC over KU was because, at least at the time, they did not require Calculus 3 or differential equations. They only required through Calc 2 and linear algebra. So that is what I picked. And like, it was so fun, right? Like, it was so close to the plaza. I could drive over on a nice day and sit outside of Starbucks and get some work done. I did not do that a single time, but the sentiment was still there, and that's what mattered. I remember my first semester at UMKC, I took a data structures class, and I was completely worthless. My teammates were fantastic, and it's not like I wasn't communicating with them or wasn't trying to contribute. I just genuinely had no idea what was going on. And it, you know, I felt that way through so many of my classes, and I made it through and I got good grades, but it was very expensive on the mental bandwidth to be okay. There were a few select teachers whose offices I would regularly go cry in. It was fantastic. I'm sure they just loved that. But it was so disheartening to feel so bad about school all the time, because you see all the people around you succeeding and you're like, why can't I just do it like they can? I had a bunch of software engineer friends that I spoke with all the time about how much I was struggling, and they kept telling me to do projects outside of school to get better. And that made a lot of sense. But like, if I'm going to school to learn how to program, and then I'm going to be programming at work for the rest of my life, why on earth would I want to spend my free time also programming? That did not appeal to me in the slightest. And I could never bring myself to do it. I spent so much time feeling bad about myself because my friends were in the industry and they know what they're talking about. And it makes total sense that the more you practice at something, the better you get at it. But why would I spend my free time learning how to do a job that I'm going to be doing the rest of my life when I could be doing literally anything else? But at this point, it was also starting to dawn on me that after, I graduated, I was going to have to continue living my life. Like, I was going to have to go out and find a job and be successful and be able to put food on my table and live. And I invested so much energy worrying about how I was never going to make anything of myself. I could not be a software engineer. It's not that I wasn't smart enough, it's just that it really didn't make sense. And to be completely honest, I didn't like it either. You know, sitting down to program, to me, it's daunting. I don't like sitting there for hours and hours trying to figure out the right logic or coming through 10,000 lines of code to find the missing semicolon. That's just not enjoyable to me. Not to mention, I'm also more of a creative person than sitting down to program allows for. I've always liked arts and crafts. You know, I was destroying my parents' house with my art from the moment I opened my eyes. And now I'm, constantly busy destroying my own house. We love to see it. I don't want to stare at code all day. I want to make pretty colors and things that are aesthetically pleasing, and code is just not that. And at this point in my education, there were 2 classes that I had taken at this point that I actually really enjoyed, which was web development and database design. Those were fun. I was good at those, but I felt like my only option was to be a software engineer because that's what literally everybody else was doing. Towards the end of my bachelor's degree, I decided to go on and get a master's. The majority of my computer science friends actually recommended against a master's because they said I wouldn't need it, but there were a couple of reasons why I wanted to go ahead and do it. First off, UMKC had a combined BS-MS program where if you signed up for your master's degree during the senior year of your bachelor's, you could get the bachelor's rate for your classes. And I have a link to that up here if anybody is interested in looking into that. This program also waived the GRE, which is fantastic. Second, I wasn't sure where I would end up, and the thought of returning back to school later in life was absolutely not appealing to me. as well as you never know when you might need that higher education. And then third, the best option is that this meant that I could put off finding a job for a whole extra year. Fantastic. So starting as a master's student, that meant that I could apply to be a GTA, which I did. And for those who don't know, a GTA is a graduate teaching assistant, which a lot of schools, it kind of depends what they have you do. But for my GTA position, I was more teaching, whereas at some other schools you might be doing research or helping the teacher or something like that. But for my position, I was actually teaching classes. And so the very first class that you and Casey gave me happened to be the database design class that I absolutely adored. It was my baby. It's no longer offered, but it was my baby, my very favorite. My first semester teaching was also spring of 2020, so it wasn't great by any means, but like it was kind of like the mildly ugly stepchild semester, if you will. Going through my master's degree made me feel a little bit better about my life and its choices. I was able to take some classes that seemed more exciting to me. I took some more database classes, virtual reality, machine learning, things that weren't just software engineering. And I think that because I had more interest in these classes, my master's degree was actually a lot easier for me to go through than my bachelor's. Another thing that I found was that everyone who was in the master's program was kind of on a different path. It was no longer all just software engineering. You know, people were more diverse in what they wanted. And that was pretty cool to hear the different avenues that people were looking at. At the same time, I was really enjoying being a GTA, and I thought maybe teaching could be a contender. It made me a little nervous because as a professor at a four-year institution, there's typically a lot of research involved. I gave research a valiant effort. During the summer of 2019, I joined some research at Tel Aviv University in atmospheric sciences to determine if natural disasters could be predicted before they happened. We used MATLAB for that. That also turned into a social hour for me. It was actually more like a social 2 months because I spent 2 months just gallivanting and spending all my money instead of, you know, doing too much work. I gave it another attempt during my master's program by joining an Internet of Things project about detecting anxiety levels in dementia patients. That one was a little bit better for me because I was doing the actual data collection, but research still wasn't my favorite thing. So teaching was like kind of on the table as an appetizer, but it just wasn't the main entree yet because research was a big no-no for me. I say as I'm currently doing more research, but I digress. As far as my work history goes, up to this point, I worked at my first job for 8 years. I was an optometric technician at an eye doctor's office, and I actually only left because the doctor retired and she closed her practice. I started there in 2014 at 16 years old. And then in 2017, I decided I needed more money in addition to the doctor's office. So I got a second job at Johnson County Community College in kind of a student tech support role. After the doctor's office closed, I, of course, decided I needed another job to replace it. But since I already had my master's degree at that point and was halfway through my master's, I thought that I could at least start looking for a full-time job or, you know, an internship rather than another student position. And so as I was on that job search, a job posting went up in the game development department for a programming teacher. Working in a community college was ideal because it's not a research university. I would get to focus on my teaching, which is exactly what I wanted to do. I had also just finished up a couple VR electives or virtual reality electives for my master's degree, which I really enjoyed. So I thought I would go ahead and apply. I also, of course, had experience teaching as a GTA, but imposter syndrome is real. So I wasn't sure what would happen. And then at that same time, I also started applying for summer internships. I was specifically looking outside of pure software engineering because I knew that that was not what I wanted to do. I was also trying to look at companies that I wouldn't normally think of working for because, like, again, I knew that they had a need for all these computer people in different roles, but it's so easy to forget when you're fresh into the industry, like, yeah, Price Chopper probably does need somebody running their databases, maybe even like 2 or 3 people, who would have thought? And so that spring, I started my full-time teaching job at Johnson County in game development. And then that summer, I landed an internship in business intelligence at Evergy. Imagine that, an energy company needing computer help. Who would have thought? I interned at Evergy for about a year. I was making internal budgeting applications using Oracle's Application Express. This position utilized a lot of my database administration knowledge, which was awesome. And I also really liked the involvement of user interfaces, which is another thing that's very interesting to me, probably because I do have that kind of creative mindset. Ultimately, though, I decided that teaching was where I wanted to stay, so that is where I am now. I finished up my master's degree. I also went through UMKC's Preparing Future Faculty program, which was a graduate certificate centered around the higher ed job search, which was fantastic. And currently, I still teach at UMKC as an adjunct in computer science, teaching various computer science topics. This semester, I'm teaching human-computer interfaces, computing resources administration, and web development. And in addition to that, I'm also enrolled in an EDS program, or an education specialist program, for digital leadership at Fort Hays State University. And an EDS, for those who don't know, it's kind of like an in-between program between a master's and a PhD. So kind of think of like PhD-ish, but without the dissertation. I was in game development at Johnson County up until this semester when I made the switch over to web development. But to give you a little bit more of a look into what I did in games, I taught all of the game programming classes. So this involved classes like game programming 1 and 2, artificial intelligence, tools design, user-centered design, stuff like that. Our program utilizes Unity game engine, so the students learned C#. And I made it the goal of my classes for students to have experience developing a wide range of games and tools to make themselves versatile in the industry. So for example, in my Game Programming 2 class, they worked on 4 games throughout the duration of the semester, which included making a platformer, a 2D arcade game, a shmup or a shoot 'em up, and a free choice game, but following a game jam theme. Games was great. However, I myself am not a gamer, and I felt some kind of a disconnect from my students because they had such a deep passion for the subject when I just didn't. And so it was important to me to do something where I shared that same passion with my students. I believe that that makes for a healthier and more fun classroom environment, so that was really important to me. And that's when I decided to make the switch over to web development. And since I'm still new, I don't quite have a complete overview of the classes that I regularly teach, but this semester I'm teaching HTML and CSS, web applications, and jQuery. So it's a great balance of different technologies and classes that are spread out across the 2-year curriculum, which makes it kind of fun because then I have students coming in at all different skill levels and we're doing all sorts of different stuff. So anyway, all of that to say, I had my fair share of bouncing around. And something that I wish had been more emphasized to me when I was trying to decide what I actually wanted to do was how versatile computer science is. When I was going through school, it totally seemed like my only option was software engineering. And that was really all that any of my peers talked about. That was all that I heard about when it came to the internship search and the job search. And again, like I happen to be friends with a lot of software engineers that kind of swayed this for me as well. And at the time, they all worked for either large companies or startups. And so those also seemed like my only options as far as employment goes. And I was kind of oblivious to the fact that literally every company and organization out there has other business needs besides just software. Businesses need, database designers and data analysts and web designers and software trainers and technology evaluators and consultants and a whole array of other computer-related jobs in order to be successful, all of which call for a computer science or a related degree. And especially with how powerful the shift to technology has been over the last decade, everybody, all companies, all organizations need these positions filled desperately. So that being said, I've had a number of people ask me why I chose academia. I'm definitely one of the youngest teachers at Johnson County. I don't know if I am the youngest, but I'm definitely one of the younger ones. And so when you're going through school for computer science, the software engineer position is kind of glamorized, and nothing else is really considered. And so people are asking me, why did you choose academia instead of going into the industry? Academia doesn't pay as well. You could be making more money. Professors are usually so much older. I am very happy with my job. In the industry, you're working an 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, sitting at a desk all day, going from meeting to meeting. And that's just not something that I would enjoy. In academia, I find that my brain is just busier. You go in and you teach every day. And so this allows you to keep up to date on the latest and greatest technologies rather than having to keep using the same thing that your company wants you to use, which prevents you from being more well-rounded with your knowledge. I get to teach a wide array of different subjects across all of computer science, which makes me versatile in that regard as well. I'm interacting with other colleagues and students in a way that I would not get to out in the industry. I'm learning new things every day from everyone that I'm surrounded with at my job. I personally think that students have a lot of knowledge to share. They're coming in with a different lens and so many different ideas. And while I am the same age as a lot of my students, I'm 25. So, at Johnson County, we tend to get people that are right out of high school. So I'm kind of in the same age bracket as them. I grew up so immersed in technology. However, the people that are coming in that are a little bit younger than me, they're even more immersed in technology than I was. But for the most part, we're kind of on the same technology level, which is really interesting to share that with so many people, in this kind of an environment. Not to mention, I'm finding that there is a little bit of magic in every corner of teaching in any sector of computer science. So for example, in game development, my students had a passion for what they were doing, an extremely deep, deep passion. They poured their heart and soul into every single assignment, and it was awesome. I am also, keep in mind, I am very easily impressed since I don't really play video games, but I felt like their quality of work was unlike any other. And in my new department of web development, I have a lot of non-traditional students. So a lot of them are returning to school to further their education or coming back to switch careers or whatever the situation is. And I have learned so much from these individuals because they are coming in with these different lenses and different experiences, and it's so cool. Another aspect of teaching, which is neat, and not really something that I thought about before getting into it, was the technology. When you think of teaching, I think of more traditional teaching, like, whiteboards and overheads, or even like, something like smart boards, for people who came in after the overhead era. When I was in elementary school, we didn't have learning management systems like we do now. We just, wrote everything down on our planners, and we had our parents sign it every night. And our homework assignments were on paper, and we'd physically bring it back to class the next day and turn it in. And I kind of grew up on the cusp of when classrooms became more electronic. And so now that I'm a college teacher, the face of teaching is totally digital. Of course, I'm teaching in a technology related field, but it's also really cool to be involved with the educational technology. So, deciding on learning management systems and creating my online course to look a certain way and be as user-friendly as possible, and deciding on technology to use in the classroom and all that fun stuff. And that's actually been a lot about what my EDS program is about. Currently, I'm working on my EDS in digital leadership, and my capstone project is about Zoom alternatives and how Zoom isn't necessarily the best option for online teaching, and how to integrate other options into the classroom when Zoom has become so deeply ingrained into the virtual education setting. And it's been really interesting. I teach in web development and computer science, of course, but within that is a whole other world of technology and computers that I never even thought about, because why would I? As a student, I didn't think about the teaching side of the classroom. I'm only thinking about the student side and getting my assignments done. And so that was another thing to consider. There are always going to be things behind the scenes that you might miss because that's not your focal point. But being exposed to those things can help you determine what you like or what you don't like. And this realization is something that I feel like I might not have gotten out of the industry, where you don't have the same kind of exposure to things outside of what you normally do. My day-to-day, teaching schedule isn't normal. It's different every class, every day, every year, and that's really special to me. Sorry, we might be having some technical difficulties here. I see it says preparing live stream. I don't know if anybody can still actually hear me talking. Oh, perfect. Cool. Thank you for the validation. Great. Yeah, it says preparing live streaming, and then it said that the recording stopped. So I'm not sure what happened, but cool. All right. So how did I know that the industry wasn't for me? The industry experience is, of course, going to be different everywhere you go. And to be honest, my industry experience was actually pretty great, but it still wasn't what I wanted to do, at least not full time. And so, like I said earlier, I interned at Evergy for almost a year, and it was awesome. It was during the pandemic, so I definitely feel like I missed a lot of the experience. From what I heard before the pandemic, when they were face-to-face, they had an absolutely incredible internship program with lots of fun things and community engagement events and fun coworker outings and all that good stuff. And that definitely still made, they definitely still made the most out of the online internship. One thing that comes to mind is the one time that they hosted a breakfast for UMKC students that were interning, and somebody physically drove out to my house the morning of and dropped off a donut. That's the picture of it right there in the upper right-hand corner. It was very cute, and I remember that. But based on what I heard, it just wasn't the same. The work I did for the internship was really cool and interesting. The applications that I made, they were nifty. The software was pretty robust. My mentor was fantastic. The leadership team was just amazing. They were very helpful and encouraging. And then just as a company, they did other things that in the grand scheme were so small and mundane, but it really meant a lot to me. You know, like over the holidays, they sent out holiday cards to everybody and they mailed us chocolates, and like they just really cared about company morale. And so it was super cute, and they did it so well. But the 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, just sitting at a desk kind of a deal, it just wasn't for me. I would, of course, do it. You know, that's kind of the industry that I signed up for. But since I, since I'd already gotten a taste of teaching and what it's like to be in the classroom, it was hard for me to want to move away from that. I definitely would have wanted to stay at Evergy part-time if, you know, they had something like that, but unfortunately they didn't. So then that brings me to my other ounce of industry work, which is freelance web development. I think I built my first website in like 3rd grade. And when my friends and I were like, oh my gosh, webs.com is free, let's make a website. And that's when it all started. I don't even know what we put on there. It was probably cringy things, I'm sure. And I think I used webs.com again in like 8th grade for a website about ozone depletion. Freshman year for high school biology, I remember I built a website with HTML. And I think it was on like radiation or something like that. And also in high school, I took a web development class and we used Dreamweaver for that. I really enjoyed it, but at the time, my high school didn't have anything in web development beyond that. And then once I reached college, there was one single web development class offered at UMKC when we actually dug into the HTML and the CSS. And then that was it. I really enjoyed that class. Now I'm teaching it, which is cool. But that was about it for my entry to web development. And I remember using it here and there during other classes. I remember using it for my capstone class when we built an application for Commerce Bank. And I think I also remember doing something with like stocks at a hackathon once. I want to say one of those might have been React and one of them might have been Angular, but it's hard to remember. That was a very long time ago. And then my first dip into freelancing came during the pandemic when I was on Facebook one day and I found somebody running a super early nonprofit startup whose mission I really liked. And they were looking for somebody to build their website on Wix. Wix is a website builder very similar to Webs. So I thought that it would be a good way for me to get some more experience with website builders, something for the resume, as well as to help a new startup with a really solid mission. I had a number of meetings with the client during the pandemic and we got their website up and running and I taught them how to make changes themselves and that was it. Every once in a while, they still reach out to me, maybe like once or twice a year asking for help on something, but for the most part, they're pretty self-sufficient now. And that was really cool. I really liked being able to see everything come together. I am I am not a very impatient person, but I am a very excited person, very excited to see immediate changes, like right now, immediate changes. So that was way more favorable to me. I also enjoyed working with a client. I know not everybody would agree with me, but they were fun and they were so thankful for what I was doing, and they were very easy and pleasant to work with. And I also liked how many people would get to see my work. I love being the center of attention, if anybody hasn't noticed yet. So being able to point to something and be like, look what I made, Mom, that was really cool to me. During the middle of that was also the time that I started teaching the web development class at UMKC. And after such a pleasant experience working with a client and a little brainstorming with our amazing admin, I decided to take back to social media and see if I could find other small organizations or companies needing a website made, and then have it as a semester-long project in my class. I was worried at first if I would find enough people to participate. But then I had a totally overwhelming response on Facebook. I don't even know what the final amount of responses was, but I ended up having 15 groups of students. So I was able to involve 30 clients around the Kansas City Metro, and each student group had one client that needed an entire website built from scratch, and one client that had a website already but needed to be redone. It was a hard project. I had to work with UMKC Legal to get contracts drawn up for both the students and the clients. I had to regularly meet with all 30 clients. I had to oversee what work was getting done. I had to make sure that clients were being responsive to the students and that the students were being responsive to the clients. And it was just a lot. But it was an incredible experience for the students. And I was really pleased to have helped the local small business community in such a large way. Unfortunately, I haven't had the ability to redo that project again, just time element, but I'm hoping to bring it back within the next few semesters. But anyway, after seeing the overwhelming amount of engagement on social media, specifically from people who already had websites that needed to be redone, it dawned on me just how many people are out there throwing together a website on a website builder, either with no concept of how users expect websites to work, or how users expect, or how they would expect them to work, or they know they don't know what they should do, or they know what they should do, but they just don't have the time to invest into their website because they're too busy running their own business. And so it made me curious, like, if I just went up to somebody and I said, hey, I noticed your website could maybe use a little love, could I help? Number one, would that offend them? And number two, would that get me work? And so I'm happy to report that the 2 times I did that, it did in fact work. For both companies, the owners have a lot of knowledge about web development already and getting a website out there, but it was simply the time element that was stopping them from getting any further on it. And because of that, it wasn't necessarily their top priority either. Like, their website was sufficient for what they needed it for, so it was good enough. But when you can spot a need like that and know that you can offer them something that would probably be really helpful, it can be of great benefit to you. And so what I'm trying to say here is, don't be afraid to ask questions and see if you can create your own opportunities. If you recognize a need that could greatly benefit someone, but you question if they have the time or the resources to invest, it never hurts to ask and advertise yourself. And like I kind of talked about earlier, don't forget that literally every company out there is going to need some kind of computer assistance. Only, one of the companies that I do the website for is actually a circus company. I started taking circus classes for fun and I wanted to be more involved somehow. So I thought, hey, this could be an opportunity for me to benefit something that I have a personal relationship with and I care a lot about while doing work that I actually enjoy doing. There's a picture of me on a lyre. It's great. And so to give you a little bit more of a look into what that work is like, originally they were using WordPress, which is a content management system for building websites, along with an external booking software. And so the goal was to redo the website to make it more user-friendly, as well as evaluate other options of booking software and possibly make it internally driven rather than externally driven. And so this took quite some time. We're still working on it. And ultimately, after sprucing up the website to make it more user-friendly, we were then able to identify WordPress plugins that could recreate what the booking software was doing for us in a more user-friendly way. It's still not perfect by any means, but it's better than what it was. And so this makes the front end, where a client is trying to enroll in a class, much easier to navigate and go through the purchasing process, while on the back end, the administrators are better able to navigate tasks like taking attendance and scheduling parties and keeping track of invoices and all the business needs. And so the way that we have the website now, it's not the fastest, which can be very damaging to a business. So we are continuing to evaluate other options for booking that might help speed up the website, since we have determined that some of the plugins we've chosen are slowing it down quite a bit. It's been a long process, but it's been really fun. And after we are content with the speed and our choice of booking software, the next thing that we'll do is conduct user testing. And so the user testing is going to involve monitoring the way that people navigate through our website, so we can see if the way that they would expect to find information is actually the way that the website works. And then after we identify areas where maybe the functionality doesn't match the way that somebody would expect it to, or something like that, we can make those changes to make the website easier for people to navigate. Software engineering is glorified throughout school. Software engineering is all that everyone talks about, and it's kind of the buzzword career. When you're going through med school, somebody might ask you what kind of doctor you want to be, but when you say you're in computer science school, they're like, wow, I couldn't do that. And then they just kind of move on, which is kind of a weird reaction, but like, whatever. But like I said, there are so many different options within the company or within the world of computer science. And a company's need for a software engineer is, of course, never going to go away, but neither is their need for database administrators and analysts and resource administrators and webmasters and educational technologists and simulation developers. Chances are, if you can imagine some aspect of computer science which you are interested in, you can probably find a job. The important thing is that you continue exploring your options. Don't be opposed to seeking out options within options, because there could be things involved in a career that you never thought about. And be confident in the fact that it's perfectly acceptable for you to be kind of on the fence and to change to something else that suits you better down the line. When I switched over from games to web, I felt weird doing that, because I kind of felt like at my age, I should be more settled and that I shouldn't be doing career switches like this. But I'm so happy that I did. I love my new classes that I have. I love my new department. I love my new students. It was such a positive change. And I am so grateful that I was presented with the opportunity to do something that fit my personality better. It's creative. It shows me my changes immediately. I get to put it on display for the whole world to see. The errors that I make more sense. It's amazing. And there truly is something in computer science for everyone, even if you're not sold on programming. Don't be afraid to think out of the box. While all your friends are going to work for these huge companies as a software engineer, you too could work for the circus. Or maybe you want to work in, for an airline and databases and get free flights. Or maybe you want to be a data analyst at Home Depot and get free light bulbs or something. I don't know. Or maybe you want to be a webmaster for an animal shelter and help animals find their forever home. Every organization and company out there has a wide range of business needs. And you could start off with thinking about something that you would really benefit from, maybe somewhere that you shop a lot and you maybe want a discount, start there and see what opportunities are available. And if there aren't any, but you're like, maybe there should be, it never hurts to ask. You never know when somebody might take you up on your offer. And lastly, you don't have to have it all figured out as you're going through school. And even after school, you still don't have to have it all figured out. It is never too late to accept that maybe something else would be a better option for you and explore what that might mean. Computer science brings endless possibilities. And as you can very much tell, I jumped around a lot throughout high school, college, and even after college. It is so easy to be swayed by what everybody else is doing. Just, it's kind of like when your mom is like, if all your friends jumped off of a bridge, would you? But instead it's like, if all your friends are software engineers, would you? I know that conversation with my mom, like the latter one, would go over much better than the first one, but you get the idea. There are so many opportunities available to you after going through computer science, and paving your own way through the industry is going to bring you much more fulfillment than just following the masses. I promise you that. So that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions at all, here is my email address, as well as here is my LinkedIn if you would like to connect.
All right. Thank you so much, Alexa, for the awesome presentation. I loved all the pictures. I feel like I got to go on that whole journey with you. At some point, our transmission actually cut out, so we hopped back in there, thankfully. And I really liked how you talked about the facet of creativity being involved in computer science. Could you talk a little bit more about how you find that intersection of creativity and computer science?
Yeah, so there's so many different ways to involve like creativity in computer science. I had no idea. I remember through my first semester at UMKC, I was in the data structures class, and it's all just sitting down and producing your code and then watching it in the command line. And that just, it wasn't my thing. I just didn't enjoy it. And so having something that had an interface, having some kind of an interface or building my own interface and being able to not only get that immediate satisfaction, but also visually being able to see something, that was just amazing. And there's such a large world of computer interfaces. Zoom has an interface, and all of the websites you visit have an interface, and all of your computer applications. And there's so many things that you can do to challenge the creative mind in computer science, even if you start off just working in the command line.
That's great. And then besides creativity, what would you say overall are some good skill sets or qualities that the field requires, whether that be academia or in the industry itself?
The number one thing I think is just going to be confidence.
Mm.
You can learn anything that you need to on the job. People are more than happy to train you, and you're going to learn a lot just by doing the work. As I kind of mentioned earlier, which was a major thing that I had and still have, is the imposter syndrome. And just having the confidence to be able to create your own opportunities, to acknowledge that you're smarter than you think you are, and acknowledge the different things that you have to the table, that you have to bring to the table. That's going to be huge. Especially, I didn't get into it, but being a female in computer science, just having that confidence is going to be such a big thing. Of course, having the knowledge of, if you're going into databases and you've never touched a database before, having at least a little bit of experience is always good, but a lot of those soft skills are so highly sought after right now. So those are going to be some major things.
Absolutely. We have a question from an attendee asking, I've been looking at coding boot camps so I can get a job sooner than getting a 4-year degree. What are the advantages or disadvantages of doing something like boot camp versus a degree?
Okay, so I never did a boot camp, but the reason why I did not want to do a boot camp was a lot of it was for like accreditation purposes. So a institution, most of them are going to have accreditations that are associated with it, whether it's like the Higher Learning Commission or ABET or something like that. ABET, I don't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's like an accrediting body of engineering technologies, I think. And some of the positions that you might be looking at could require a degree from an accredited institution. So that would be something to look at. Also, as far as like a boot camp versus a degree, you could go online and look up what job postings that you're interested in require. A lot of them will require a computer science bachelor's degree or something similar to that. And some of them, of course, also would require a certain kind of certificate, or they might take an associate's degree. But that would be something to look into, is what your jobs that you're looking into are actually going to accept.
A good answer. We also have another question asking, how would you convey your area of expertise to a client that doesn't understand what you do but wants to work with you?
I have to make it as simple as possible. Finding things that you might be able to compare it to kind of like help create analogies is going to be a really good way. Showing them a portfolio of things that you've done in the past would be really good. So then you can be like, here's, for websites, for example, like here's a website that I made for somebody else. And they might be like, wow, that's really cool. I want something just like it. You could also send them off to look at other things and have them send you examples of what they're looking for. And then you can be like, yeah, I can do this for you. And they'll be like, oh, wow, you're amazing. So yeah, a lot of it's just kind of bringing it down to their level. And of course, a lot of people are visual people as well. And so being able to show them or having them identify what it is that they're looking for is going to be extremely beneficial.
That's great. Yeah, analogies are typically pretty helpful. We have another question asking, what should I look for when selecting a college to attend? Do they all pretty much have the same degree programs, or are there any differences?
So, I mean, most colleges nowadays have computer science. Some of them are going to have different emphases. So, if you're looking into cybersecurity specifically, or health information systems, or IT, like a lot of them will have emphases for those, or like separate little programs for those. So that would be something to look into. As far as accreditations go, that would be a good thing to look into. UMKC's program was ABET accredited, and that was something that I was looking for. So again, going to potential job postings that you might be interested in and seeing what they might require. There's also a lot of programs out there that are for certificates as well. At Johnson County, there are a number of computer science certificate programs, and so a lot of those certificates are going to be those job requirements. So that would be something else to look into. It just kind of depends on specifically what kind of computer science that you're wanting to go into, and then what some of those like smaller programs are that you might have an interest in.
Okay. And you talked a lot about those differences between an academic route and an industry route. What would you say the differences on the daily basis would be? Would you imagine it being more solo work or more teamwork in the industry versus in the academic world?
I think it probably depends more on the organization that you're working on or working for. As a freelance web developer, it's pretty hands off. Like, I meet with the client every couple of weeks, but for the most part, it's just working on my own. But then like when I worked at Evergy, I had a mentor that I was working with all the time. And maybe that would have been different because I was an intern rather than a full-on employee, but I was always working with people when I was at Evergy. Versus my experience in web development. And then at the college, the majority of my job is talking with students all the time and communicating with my coworkers to make sure that, our curricula is up to date and getting homework out and addressing any issues or whatnot. So it's a lot of talking with people. So I think it just kind of depends on your specific position as well as the organization you're working for.
Okay. Yeah, I did like how you mentioned that every single organization that you can probably imagine does have that need for computer science. Someone's asking, what's that computer on the desk behind you?
Oh, this is a Commodore 64. This one is a Compaq Presario. I found this in my grandpa's basement, but this one is a Commodore 64. And then
Nice.
that's some Mac something. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. It's something Apple.
Very cool. Are there internships for high school students, or do I have to wait for college to get an internship?
Unfortunately, most of the internships are going to require you to be either a junior or senior in a college program. Sometimes some of them are even just for bachelor's students, and even master's students can apply. But unfortunately, high school is a little early. However, like I kind of talked about earlier, don't be afraid to get on social media and see if you can create your own experiences, because a lot of those don't care how old you are. They're just like, oh, I need this skill set and you've got it. Sounds good. So unfortunately, probably no like internships with organizations, but don't be afraid to go to some of those small businesses and startups.
Yeah, all in good time. So thank you for the talk. You mentioned web development as a subject you are more passionate about than compared to a subject like gaming. Can you talk about what draws you to web development?
Yeah, I feel like it's something that we use all the time. And so just being able to appeal to more of an audience, I think is appealing to me. But I also really like I think my favorite part of web development is the like user interface part of it. I love doing user testing, which is wild, and I'm sure nobody else in the world would agree with me, but I love doing user testing. I think it's so interesting to observe people using a website and seeing the way that they expect something to work, and then seeing the way that it actually works. And then being able to see how you can change the website to be more user friendly. I'm also very passionate about web accessibility. So making sure that websites are accessible for people who might have a hearing impairment, or for somebody with a motor impairment, or somebody that is elderly, stuff like that. I just think that's really interesting. So I love the graphical user interface part of it the most.
That is so important. I can think of so many websites off the top of my head that I wish I could have that be smoothed out for everybody. Um, so could we talk a little bit about job interviews? What kind of tips do you have for job interviews, and what does that look like? How do you prove you are adept at computer science?
So it depends again on the job. So like some of the interviews that I had, there were no technical questions at all, and they just interviewed me with standard interview questions. Some of the interviews were technical interviews where they might have you show your skills. And so there's a website, it's called LeetCode, LEETCODE.com. And that has a lot of like potential interview questions on there. It's a really good like practice website, and it's got all sorts of languages and questions, and it's really good. So I would recommend going to check that out. So it kind of depends, but then like when I interviewed for my teaching position, they had me do a demonstration of my teaching style. And I remember in one of my interviews, they asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to. And it's like, I could either just think of something and just kind of talk, but it's like, these people are going to know if I answer it incorrect. Like that was the point of the interview. And so I said, I don't know, I'm going to have to look it up later and get back to you. And that was a totally acceptable question, because in the classroom, students are going to ask you questions that you don't know the answer to. And even in the industry, people are going to ask you things that you don't know the answer to. And it is totally okay to admit that you don't know the answer to their question. Sometimes I guess maybe that could be an issue, if it's something that's really important, like if it's the entire job and they ask you a question and it's like, you should probably know this. But for the most part, people aren't going to know everything, and being able to admit that you don't know the question and that you don't know the answer, admit that you would need to speak with your teammates, that shows your collaboration efforts, and it shows that you're willing to learn something new. So I think that's like one of the biggest things, is that it is okay to admit in an interview that you don't know everything.
That's great. We're all in the progress of learning. And speaking of learning, do you have any tips to stay up to date with the fast changing world of technology?
It's changing so fast. It's wild. There's websites and feeds out there that will tell you all about the latest and greatest technologies. There are some conferences, like virtual conferences, that you could probably attend. I'm trying to think of, things that are free. Of course, there's paid for conferences, but I know that there's a number of free conferences out there for keeping up with technology. There's a number of podcasts and YouTube videos that would be beneficial. But also just playing around, like things that you have an interest in, just playing around with it and seeing what you discover is going to be great. And it's also things that you can put on your resume too. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I like how in your journey of just like self-discovery and your career path, you tried on so many different things before you decided to actually commit or find your interests out there. It's important to explore. So you mentioned teammates. Are most computer science jobs part of a team, or are you on your own?
The majority of them are going to be teams, is what I've found. And that's something that is very highly emphasized in computer science, like, computer science programs as well. There's so much teamwork inside of your classes. So for the most part, you're going to have teams. And a lot of the companies, they'll have like little groups for each individual feature, and then you'll have to work with that team for those features that you're working on. So a lot of it is going to be teamwork. Every once in a while, you might have something individual, especially if you're freelancing, but a lot of it is going to be in teams.
Okay. And I don't know if I'm saying this name right, but Aiden would like to know a little bit more about your work at Evergy. Could you expand on what you did there?
Yeah, so I was an intern in business intelligence. And so I was helping to create like internal budgeting applications. And I was using a program called Oracle's Application Express. And it was like user interface software where you build a user interface and then it would connect to a bunch of databases in the back end, and then people would be able to input information and then it would get sent to the databases for tracking purposes. It was pretty cool. I enjoyed it.
Very cool. And how important do you think a web presence is? Is it absolutely necessary? Is it helpful? And that would include like social media or a website.
Oh, like for portfolio purposes?
Um, I think just navigating the career world, like, is it necessary to have a web presence?
Portfolios are great. Portfolios are really nice. Making your own website to showcase your portfolio is really nice. You can also stick that on your business cards and have your own little QR code. Those are great. I don't know that companies necessarily look at like other social media things. Like, I don't think whether you have a LinkedIn or not, like, I guess for some companies, maybe that's important, but like, I didn't see anybody like rushing over to my LinkedIn to see what was on there, and of course there's an importance of like being smart in the digital world, having digital citizenship and not, like kind of monitoring what you're posting on social media and all that good stuff. But I don't think it really had like the biggest role in at least my experience. Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn is good. Having a website is really good. That's a project in a lot of my classes is building a portfolio website. So I'm a big proponent of that. But other than that,
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did have your website though, since I was able to check that out on your LinkedIn. And it's a really good website. So if anyone wants a good example, check it out. What is your favorite programming language? The one you enjoy working with the most?
I love databases, so I think MySQL. I think I'm a MySQL girly. As far as like an actual language goes, probably like Java, but I still don't like totally enjoy that kind of programming. So if I could pick like anything in the world, I think it would be MySQL. And then after that, it would be like HTML, CSS kind of stuff. I don't love JavaScript, honestly. I really like CSS. I know that's like not a language, but I really like styling things. So again, the creativity aspect is my favorite.
Awesome. And I imagine that this field would require a lot of studying. Do you have any tips for studying and focusing?
Um, Again, doing things that you're interested in is going to be the biggest one, because if you don't have an interest in what you're trying to do, it's going to be really hard to get through your classes. And there's always going to be classes that you are required to take that are not going to fit your interests. But if you have electives, take electives that you're interested in. And this goes for people in high school too. Take electives that you're interested in. I remember in high school, I took a lot of theater classes and jewelry and art classes. And I'm so glad that I did, especially in, when I was in that time of my life before I had to start paying for the classes that I wanted to take. It was so fun and it was such a good experience, and you never know when those things can help you down the line. A lot of those creative classes that I was able to take, I'm still able to apply things that I learned from them today. So definitely taking classes that you have an interest in is going to be great. Having like study groups with your friends are good, like not like a study group with people that you don't know, like, but if you can, make a group of people to kind of commiserate with in your classes and make studying and learning the material fun, that's always really helpful to get through. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is just having an interest in it, and again, also the confidence. When you feel internally like you can make it through and you can be successful, you feel so much better about the work and the effort that you're putting in than if you're assuming that you can't do something.
Absolutely. And that would apply across the board to anything. Um, and since we're coming up on the hour, let's end with this question. What is the most exciting project that you have worked on so far?
Oh, that's a really good question. I've really been enjoying the circus website, honestly. I mean, like maybe I just have I have a personal stake in it, of course, which I do have a performance coming up the first weekend of December. If anybody wants to come see it, it's at Union Station. But I love working on the circus website. It's been so much fun. It's been an amazing learning experience. I'm learning a lot. WordPress isn't my favorite out there. But I'm really enjoying the working with the client, and I love the work that I'm doing. It's just very interesting to me. And I love, of course, the user testing aspect. So I think that's been my favorite part. But I really enjoyed the project from the web development class when I was working with all the small businesses. It was just really cool to know that my students were getting so much out of it, while also so deeply benefiting the local small business community. It was just amazing.
That is so cool. Definitely good luck with your performance coming up. And thank you so much, Alexa, for the awesome presentation and for taking the time to answer everybody's questions. And thank you all for tuning in today. For more information about Linda Hall Library, visit all of our social media accounts and visit our website, lindahall.org, where I also encourage you to sign up for our e-newsletter. And for the parents and teachers who are tuned in today, I hope you consider supporting the library through the Linda Hall Library Foundation. Your contributions make all of this possible and freely available. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.